Before I say anything else today, I just want you to sit with a question I saw on a clip this week, and I haven't been able to shake it since. And the question is, how do we convince the next generation that education is the key to success when we're surrounded by poor graduates and rich criminals? Well, that one sentence, that's honestly the entire episode. But today, I just do not want to react to it. I want to actually take it apart, piece by piece, and talk about what it actually looks like in real life for the younger generation right here in Zambia. Welcome back to Gifted Perspective, Mid-Climb Conversation. This isn't just me handing down an answer from the top of something mountain, having already made it, looking back with tidy hindsight. This is a conversation from somewhere in the middle of the climb, because that's honestly the most useful place to talk from. When you're mid-climb, you can still see the ground clearly. You haven't forgotten what it feels like to be down there. So today's episode feels longer than usual because this topic deserves the room. We are going to go through it in stages. First, we are going to name the tension, no sugarcoating. Second, we are going to unpack what education actually means and where it's failing people. Third, we are going to look honestly at why shortcuts appear to be winning. Fourth, and this is the heart of today's episode, we are going to talk about what would actually change this, and that's skill centers, practical training, and real infrastructure. Fifth, we'll talk about what you personally, listening right now and watching, can do with all of this. And we'll close with where policy, government, and the private sector need to step up. Let's get into it. I'm not going to sit here and defend education like it's above criticism, because that question hits because it's true. Every one of us knows somebody who did everything right. They went to school, they got the certificate, followed every step, and they're still failing to find a job. Still stretched thin and still waiting. And we know somebody else who cut every corner, and right now today, they're the one driving past in something nice. That's not a myth. That's not young people being lazy or ungrateful. That's what a lot of Zambian youths are actually watching happen around them every single day, in their own families and friend circles. So before I try to make you feel better about it, I'm not going to. I'm going to sit in the discomfort with you first, because pretending it isn't real is exactly how you lose an entire generation's trust in the system. Think about it plainly. We have graduates walking around Lusaka, Kitwe, Ndola, Livingston, every town with degrees and certificates and no job to show for it. Youth unemployment isn't just a statistic to us. It's a lived experience. It's the guy from your street who finished university 3 years ago and is still at home. It's the girl who did everything the syllabus told her to do and is now selling airtime or vegetables by the roadside just to survive. It's the cousin who has a diploma sitting in a drawer somewhere, gathering dust because it never turned into an interview, let alone a job offer. If that's the picture in front of you, why wouldn't you start questioning whether education actually leads anywhere? And I think we need to be honest about something else too, the emotional cost of this. It's not just financial, there's a real psychological weight to doing everything you were taught to do and still coming up empty. That breeds a very specific kind of quiet resentment. Not loud, not always spoken, but it sits there. And over time, it starts to look like, why should I bother? That question isn't laziness. It's a rational response to watching a system not deliver on its promise over and over again, to people you know personally. So let's not rush past that. Let's name it clearly. The system, as it currently operates for a huge number of young Zambians, is not keeping its side of the bargain. That has to be step one before anything else we say today means anything. Let me push back gently on the framing for a second. Is the actual problem education itself? Or is the problem the version of education most young Zambians are being given? Because there is a difference between sit still and memorize education and the kind where you're rewarded purely for repeating information on the back of an exam and the kind of education that compounds. Skills that build on each other, capability, not just certificate in a frame on the wall. A certificate proves you sat through something, then a skill, something you can actually do, something you can demonstrate, something a client or an employer can see with their own eyes, proves you can produce value. And here's the hard truth: our education system, as it stands, produces a lot of the first and not nearly enough of the second. We are turning out graduates who can write brilliant exam answers, but who've never touched actual tools, equipment, or software they'll need to walk into an industry and work on day one. That's not the individual graduate's fault. That's a systems problem. And it's one we need to be loud about, consistently, not just in a viral clip once in a while. Let's break this down a bit further, because I think there's actually three separate gaps hiding inside this one problem. The first gap is the curriculum gap. A lot of what's taught, especially at lower levels, hasn't been updated to reflect what industries actually need today. We're still leaning heavily on rote memorization models that were designed for a very different economy, one with more guaranteed civil service and formal sector jobs waiting at the other end. That economy doesn't fully exist anymore. It's not at a scale needed to absorb every graduate. The second gap is the exposure gap. Even while the content is decent, a lot of students go through years of schooling without ever touching the actual equipment, software, or real-world scenarios of the field they're studying. You can study accounting and never touch real accounting software. You can study a trade and never actually put your hands on machinery until you are out there looking for a job, if you're lucky enough to find an attachment at all. And the third gap is the transition gap. Even the students who do get solid theoretical grounding often have no structured pathway from finished school to employed or self-employed. There is no consistent bridge. You're just handed a certificate and told, good luck. With automation and AI reshaping industries globally, all three of these gaps are only going to widen if nothing changes. Employers here and everywhere are going to care less about the piece of paper and more about what you can actually produce, actually solve, and actually build. If our systems don't catch up to that shift, we are setting up an entire generation to hold qualifications that don't translate into livelihoods. And that's a slow-moving crisis because it doesn't show up all at once. It shows up one disappointed graduate at a time, one drawer full of unused certificates at a time, until suddenly an entire generation's worth. Now, let's deal with the second half of that question because it's easy to just nod along and say, yeah, crime pays, the system is rigged, and move on. Well, I don't want to do that either. I want to actually interrogate it. Let me ask a harder question. Why does the shortcut look like it's winning right now? Firstly, visibility and supervisorship bias. We see the ones who got rich quick. We don't see the ones who got caught, who lost everything just as fast as they gained it, who are sitting in a cell somewhere, who are now hiding from people they owe. That's supervisorship bias. We are only watching the highlight reel, and the highlight reels are dangerous things to build a life plan around. Nobody posts the collapse, nobody films the arrest, the shame, the family that gets dragged down with them. So a sample of what shortcuts look like: he's badly skilled toward the wings, because that's the only part that gets shown. Second is timelines. Education, when done properly, is a long, quiet, compounding curve. It doesn't look impressive in year one or year three, sometimes not even year five, especially when there is no job waiting at the end of it all. Shortcuts are short and loud and high variance. Big win or big collapse, not much in between. Humans are wired to respond to what's immediate and visible over what's slow and delayed. Even the slow thing is statistically the better bet. That's not a Zambian problem, that's a human wiring problem. And it gets amplified massively when the slow thing keeps failing to deliver in the time frame people were promised. Third, and I think this one doesn't get said enough, desperation changes the math. When someone has genuinely tried the right way for years and it hasn't worked, the shortcut stops looking like greed and starts looking like the only rational option left on the table. They started out doing exactly what they were told and only turned elsewhere after the promised path failed them repeatedly. That doesn't excuse the choice, but it explains. That doesn't excuse the choice, but it explains it. And if we want fewer people making that choice, we have to fix what pushed them toward it in the first place, not just lecture them about ethics after the fact. Fourth, the informal economy is enormous, and a lot of it sits in a gray zone. Not all shortcuts are outright criminal. Plenty are informal. Some are legal, cash-based hustles that never show up in unemployment statistics because the person isn't technically unemployed. But surviving in the informal economy with no structure, no protection, and no clear growth path isn't the same as thriving. And a lot of young people get stuck there for good, not because they chose it as their career or their dream, but because it was the fastest door that opened. So, if a young person watching right now asks me straight, why should I bother with education when it doesn't look like it's paying off around me? I don't think the honest answer is just a mindset shift. I think it's a systems answer. And here is where I want to spend real time today, because this isn't just a part I actually like, but it's a part I actually care most about. We need to stop selling education as a guarantee because it never was one. And that's the broken promise underneath this whole question. The pitch was: get a certificate, get a job, you are set. That pitch has failed a generation of Zambian graduates, and they're right to be angry about it. But the fix isn't just believe in yourself more or network harder. Those are individual level band-aids on a structural wound. The fix has to include real, serious investment in skills infrastructure. And I want to walk through exactly what that could look like today or in the near future to come. We need skills centers and technical training facilities built out across multiple sectors, not just one or two. Think about the range of what our economy actually needs strengthened. Agriculture and agro-processing. Zambia has enormous agricultural potential, but a huge amount of value is lost because raw produce isn't processed locally. Skill centers focused on food processing, packaging, cold chain logistics, and modern farming techniques could turn subsistence farming into small agri-business. Construction and the trades. welding, plumbing, electrical work, carpentry, masonry. These are skills that are most always in demand. They don't require a 4-year commitment, and these are extremely difficult to automate away. ICT and digital skills, coding, data analysis, digital marketing, IT support. This is a sector where geography matters less, meaning someone trained in a smaller town can genuinely compete for remote and international work, not just local jobs. Manufacturing and light industry, machine operation, quality control, technical maintenance, skills that fit directly into growing local industry rather than importing everything. Creative industries, video production, graphic design, music production, fashion, and garment making. This sector is chronically underinvested in, despite clearly having demand, talent, and even export potential. And critically, these need to be spread across the country, not concentrated in 1 or 2 cities. Picture it this way: a young person in a rural district or a smaller town doesn't need to relocate to Lusaka to learn welding or a software basic or agro processing or garment making. They can walk into a well-equipped, well-staffed skills center in their own province and walk out with something they can actually sell: a service, a product, or a trade. Apprenticeship and earn while you learn structures. Traditional classroom apprenticeship and earn while you learn structures. Traditional classroom only training isn't enough. The strongest models pair training with actual paid or stipended apprenticeship placements, where people are building real experience and real income at the same time they're building a skill. This also solves part of the transition gap I mentioned earlier. There's no awkward gap between finished training and as real work experience because the experience happens during the training. Short, modular, stackable courses instead of only long programs. Let's face it, not everyone can commit to a 2-year program. Skills centers should offer short, focused certifications, a few weeks to a few months that people can stack overtime and their income and schedule can allow. This meets people where they actually are, instead of demanding a commitment level a lot of young people, especially those already supporting family, simply can't afford to make. Recognition and accreditation that actually means something to employers. And for this to work, the certifications coming out of these centers need to be genuinely respected by employers. Meaning, the training standards have to be high, consistently assessed, and tied to real industry input, not just paperwork for paperwork's sake. This isn't anti-education, it's pro-capability. Keep the classrooms, keep the universities, but pair them seriously and at scale, with hands-on skills centers that give young people a second, faster, more practical route into earning a living. That's how you combat an unemployment rate this high, not by producing more paper qualifications into an economy that already has too many of them chasing few formal jobs, but by producing people who can create value, employ themselves, and employ others in sectors the economy actually needs strengthened. Now, I don't want this episode to be an episode where I just point at the government and the private sector and leave you with nothing to act on today. Systems change is slow, and I know that's frustrating to hear when you need something to change now. So let's talk about what's actually in your hands while we wait for the bigger infrastructure to catch up. If you are still in school or considering a program, ask what you'll actually be able to do at the end of it, not just what certificate you'll hold. Look for programs with practical components. Attachments, real projects work. If a program can't clearly answer what will I be able to produce or perform when I finish this, treat that as a warning sign, not a minor detail. If you're already out and stuck, treat skills building as ongoing, not something you finish at once. You don't need to wait for the government built skill centers to start. Online resources, community programs, even learning informally from someone already doing the work, all that still counts. I say this as someone doing exactly that myself, alongside other commitments, because I don't think anyone or any qualification should be the whole plan. Build something you can show, not just something you can claim. A portfolio, a small project, evidence of work. This is what increasingly convinces an employer or a client, far more than a certificate alone does. If you can show 3 examples of real work that outweighs a piece of paper in almost every situation I have seen. And be honest with yourself about the shortcut temptation without shaming yourself for failing it. If you're at that point where the fast, risky option is starting to look appealing, that's not a moral failure. It's a signal that the slow path isn't delivering fast enough for your actual situation. Use that signal to look harder for legitimate fast paths, informal trade, small entrepreneurship, apprenticeship, gig work in a real scale, before assuming the only fast option left is a legitimate one. Let's close the loop on responsibility because I don't want this episode to land only on individual young people carrying all the weight. The government needs to treat skills infrastructure as seriously as it treats formal education infrastructure, meaning real life budget lines, real facilities, real maintenance, not just occasional ribbon cuttings for centers that quietly under-deliver a few years later. The private sector needs to see workforce training as an investment, not a cost, because every company that complains about not finding skilled workers is a company with an opportunity to help build the very pipeline it's missing. Parents and communities need to expand what success is allowed to look like for a young person. A trade, a skill, an apprenticeship deserves the same respect a university degree gets, not treated as a fallback option for those who couldn't make it academically. And media platforms like this one need to keep amplifying both the honest frustration in that original question and the practical paths forward, because staying only in the frustration without ever getting the solutions leaves people stuck exactly where they started. So let's get back to where it started. How do we convince the next generation that education is the key to success when we are surrounded by poor graduates and rich criminals? Here's my stance. For this week, we stop convincing young people that a certificate alone is the key to success and start being honest that it's one key among several, and then we actually build the other keys. Skill centers spread across every province and every sector. Apprenticeships that pay you while you learn. Short, stackable, practical training that meets people where they actually are. Real partnerships between government and the private sector to fund it. And a shift in how we as a society define what a respectable, successful path even looks like. Ask me again in a few months, I might say it differently. That's the whole point of a mid-climb conversation instead of one from the top. That's it for this one, a longer episode, but I think this topic ended. If this got you thinking, if it made you uncomfortable, or if it made you disagree with me completely, that's exactly what this show is for. Send me your thoughts. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. And catch me every Saturday at 15 hours for the next mid-climb conversation. This has been The Gifted Perspective. See you again.